Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist. Learn languages, make a difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today we're going to talk about an underrated language learning technique, self-talk. I will break down what is self-talk, how can you use it, when, where, but most importantly, why you should engage in it to take your language learning journey to the next level. Stay tuned. So first of all, what is self-talk? Well, self-talk is simply talking to yourself in your target language. Now, how does self-talk work? Well, you can do this as an inner monologue. You speak to yourself silently, or you can speak out loud. Well, if you're embarrassed because of that, then it makes sense to pretend to be on the phone, which is what Luca Lampariello, for instance, suggested. And as regards the content, there is a lot of flexibility. You can talk about your own life, experience and thoughts, or you can make it organic. You can look around you and do what's called labeling, meaning trying to attach names to the things that you see around you. Whether there's a tree or a building, how do you say that in your target language? Or finally, you can do it a la carte. You can just pick and choose the specific topic. Or even you can act out certain situations. You can tell to yourself, well, now I am at the supermarket trying to buy some groceries. How can I act out a full dialogue in that situation? And you just go ahead and try to find the words and the expressions that allow you to carry out such conversation with yourself. Then there is the when and where of self-talk. Well, a big advantage of self-talk is that you can do it anytime, anywhere. But I particularly advise you to do self-talk when and where you can't study or immerse. For instance, let's say you were planning on bringing your textbook or your notebook in your target language, but you forgot it at home. Well, now you can engage in self-talk. Let's say your phone runs out of battery, there is no Wi-Fi around you, you cannot connect to the internet. Well, you can use self-talk. You cannot travel due to COVID or due to your financial situation. Well, try to use self-talk instead. Let's say you are surrounded by monolingual speakers and you have no one else with whom to talk in your target language. Well, in that case, it's better to resort to self-talk than not to practice your target language at all. And finally, let's say you're stuck in a commute or in a meeting. You are, for instance, riding the New York subway. As you know, there is not much space. There is so little space that you can barely bring out your notebook or your textbook. So in that situation, it's just better to talk to yourself, have an inner monologue in your target language. What about those situations where we've all been there when you're stuck in a meeting or whatever that person is saying is not relevant to you? What you can do is what Tim Donner does in this video that I'm going to play right now, which is to translate, or better said, interpret what his interlocutor is saying into one or more of his target languages. That way, you are paying more attention to what your interlocutor is saying, and at the same time, you're making that message entirely relevant to you and to your language learning goals. So you make every second count.
But one thing that's also very important for me is translating everything I can mentally.
What do you mean?
I've been translating while you've been talking to me.
Into what languages?
Well, I've been doing Farsi and then also German. I'm trying to think through what you're saying in German.
So you're having 3 simultaneous conversations in English, Farsi, and German right now?
I can do more.
And finally, why using self-talk at all? Well, there's a lot of pros, as you can see on the screen, and very few cons. Number one pro, as I said, it's portability. You can do it anytime, anywhere. Second, it's free. There's a huge language learning industry that tries to extract as much financial resources from you as possible, but self-talk is free. Then there's also the level flexibility. You can engage in self-talk whether it is at the beginner level or the medium one or the proficient. You can begin with just a few words, repeating just greetings to yourself in that language, or you can talk about Wittgenstein's philosophy if your proficiency in that target language allows you to. Self-talk is also really good for oral and audio practice. The more you practice, the better you become at breaking down the sound system of your target language and at pronouncing the words. It's also really effective as a warm-up or warm-down exercise. Let's say you have a language exchange ahead or an italki lesson and you're not feeling quite confident about your level in that language. You're feeling a little bit rusty. Well, it's really good to engage from 5 to 10 minutes in some self-talk because that really helps you get into the rhythm, and by the time you get to the language exchange or to the italki lesson, you're feeling much more smooth and relaxed. So it's also a confidence boost. Additionally, self-talk reinforces memory. It is not a fancy thing to say, but repetition is key when it comes to learning languages, and there's no way around that. You have to engage in systematic and ongoing repetition. Doing self-talk also grants you the possibility of engaging in tailor-made content. You can design and decide which topics you're going to tackle, and that makes it all the more fun and relevant to yourself. And there is a major con in doing self-talk, which is that you don't have any external feedback. In other words, you don't really know if you're making any mistakes and what mistakes are you making in particular. However, I will counter that with the fact that doing self-talk actually allows you to identify gaps in grammar and vocabulary. So even though you may not have the solution in front of you, you can just make mental notes and look for that solution afterwards. So say for instance, I'm walking down the street, I'm trying to say street in my target language, in French for instance, and I realize that I cannot recall that word, or even that I never came across that word to begin with. So I make the mental note that I don't know how to say street in French, and then as soon as I can I look it up, and that way I have both identified a gap in my vocabulary and solved that problem. And you might think to yourself, well, this sounds good on paper, but how does that translate into real life? Can you give me any examples on how did you use self-talk to advance your polyglot journey? And yes, I can. I can give you 2 examples in particular. Self-talk was decisive for me learning English and learning Judeo-Spanish or Ladino. Let's start with English. I was around 20 years old and I was preparing the proficiency exam from Cambridge University. I was stuck in Spain and I remembered that I only had enough money to have a couple of classes per week with a person whose first language was English. And the rest of the time it was just on me to keep practicing English. And I remember that every time I went to this person's house, when I came out, it was a struggle. I was trying to pull in one direction, which was to practice English as much as possible, but I was pulled to the opposite direction by society, which was speaking Spanish the entire time. And so I resorted to self-talk. I said to myself, okay, maybe I cannot immerse myself into an English-speaking language landscape, but to the extent that is possible, I can still talk to myself in that language to keep my sanity, to keep me in the loop of practicing English 24/7. And that's what I did. I kept talking to myself while I was on the bus, surrounded by people speaking in Spanish the whole time, and very loudly. And so I just kept talking to me in English, using the elements that I had around me to practice my vocabulary in English. So it's not that I wouldn't complain about the situation, but I would try to complain in English. So I would say, oh, I hate what's happening around me. These people are stressing me out because I would like to immerse myself in English and to have more opportunities at my disposal to practice my target language. Well, by saying that, I was actually making every second count and making my surroundings relevant to my target language learning goals. So that's one way in which I turn a negative situation into a positive one, into an opportunity.
Ooh, that's the only way to live, turning negatives to positives.
So I went on to pass that exam, and the following year that allowed me to go to London to do a master's degree in philosophy in English, and then that allowed me to get a Fulbright scholarship to go to the US and eventually to obtain a PhD degree from New York University. Would I have achieved that had I not resorted to self-talk at that critical moment? We will never know, but it was certainly conducive to my success in that language. The second case was when I was learning Ladino or Judeo-Spanish, the language spoken by the Jews who were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula at the end of the 15th century. I had limited knowledge of Ladino or Judeo-Spanish, but I wanted to give a lecture in that language at a major national conference at the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And so I said to myself, okay, I'm speak on the phone with this person whose first language is Judeo-Spanish X times per week for 1 or 2 months leading up to the conference. And I did that. I stick to it and I kept practicing Ladino that way. But then eventually I had to get on the plane and go from New York to Los Angeles, which is a 6-hour flight. And all I had in my target language was a newspaper called El Amanecer. So I said to myself, okay, I'll use that flight time to read this newspaper's issue from cover to cover, which I did in just about 1 hour. So I still had 5 remaining hours during that flight where I couldn't use any materials in my target language. So then again, I resorted to self-talk and I talked to myself, and this time around I didn't use my surroundings. Instead, I acted out in my mind how the lecture will play out. So I imagined myself talking to the audience in my target language, in Ladino, and kept practicing that speech again and again and again and again. So que Haberim, vengache monora. Hoy vos quiero hablar de un sujeto muy importante para mí y es la ideología lingüística adentro la Real Academia de la Lengua Española en Tel Aviv, Israel. Yada, yada, yada. And I kept repeating that again and again and again in my head. And by the time I actually reached the hotel, I felt much more confident in my ability to deliver that speech following day. And it was actually a great experience. Even though it was my first time addressing public audience in Ladino or Judeo-Spanish, it went down great. And so I feel that self-talk on the plane was really instrumental to my confidence and performance on the day of the conference. Fast forward, the following year I did the same. I went to the conference and I delivered my lecture entirely in Ladino or Judeo-Spanish. And this time it was much less stressful. Then a few years later, I went on to incorporate my own company on Ladino, through which I provide Ladino lessons to people all over the world. Would that have been possible without me resorting to that self-talk when the going got tough? We will never know. But it was certainly instrumental in helping me achieve my language learning goals in Ladino.
Abre tu puerta cerrada que en tu el amor a ti te vela. Partemos rosa, partemos de aquí. Partemos rosa, partemos de aquí.
So that was all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video and that you'll come to adopt self-talk as part of your language learning repertoire. And as always, thanks for watching.